Welcome back to the deep dive, where we unpack the complex world of cutting-edge tech and try to make sense of it for you.
We do our best.
Today, we're plunging into something that's been making huge waves in AI, large language models, LLMs, and this really impressive but maybe slightly mysterious ability they have to think aloud.
Right, the ones that don't just give you an answer, but show their work, so to speak.
Yeah.
They generate this whole step-by-step reasoning process.
Exactly. And this capability, it sparked a ton of excitement. People are now talking about large reasoning models, or LRMs. Things like OpenAI's O1, O3, DeepSeek R1, Claude 3.7, Sonnet Thinking, models specifically designed to show how they got there.
Yeah, and you see these intricate chains of thought, and they look, well, stunning, really compelling visually and functionally. But, for folks working in the field, a really critical technical question pops up almost immediately.
Which is?
Are these models truly reasoning like humans do? Or is what we're seeing actually a super advanced, very sophisticated kind of pattern matching, just an elaborate mimicry of logic?
And I guess from an engineering angle, how well does this reasoning actually scale? Like when the problems get really tough?
Precisely. Do they handle complexity gracefully, or do they just hit a wall? Is there some fundamental limit?
And that's exactly our mission for you, our listener, in this deep dive. As always, we're going to focus right in on the technical nitty-gritty, the details, and what they really mean.
We're trying to cut through some of the hype here.
Yeah, cutting through the hype around these powerful new models to really dig into a crucial new study. It systematically looks at their technical strengths, but also, maybe surprisingly, some pretty significant limitations.
We want to unpack how these models actually behave when you throw increasingly complex problems at them. We'll stick purely to the technical performance, how they seem to work inside, and what these findings might mean for where AI development is headed.
Right. The goal is to give you a precise, evidence-based understanding of what's really going on under the hood. No hand-waving, just the technical realities. Okay, so let's start with how we usually try to figure out if these models can, reason. Historically, the standard way to evaluate LRMs has been using things like math problems, coding challenges, established benchmarks.
Uh-huh. Standardized tests, basically.
And on the surface, that seems totally logical, right? I mean, these tasks are structured, they have clear right or wrong answers, solve the calculus problem, debug the code, you got it or you didn't. Seems pretty straightforward.
It does seem logical. And look, these benchmarks, they've been really valuable, no doubt about it. They've definitely pushed the field forward, helped improve models, gave us numbers to compare different versions.
Now I sense a but.
But they have this significant and often kind of glossed over technical problem, data contamination.
Oh.
And it's not a minor thing. It really clouds our understanding of whether the model is truly reasoning. Yeah. Basically, these huge models trained on, well, practically the whole internet,
Yeah.
They might have already seen very, very similar problems, maybe even the exact solutions during their training.
Right, so it's not really testing reasoning at that moment. It could just be like super advanced recall.
Exactly. Like pattern matching on steroids.
If it's seen 1,000 variations of a specific math problem, solving a new one might just be recognizing the pattern and pulling the answer or the method out of its massive memory, not actually working it out from scratch.
Precisely. It's like testing a student on problems taken directly from the textbook they just memorized. Did they learn to reason or just to memorize? It's a fundamental technical question for us.
So if we really want to understand how they think, or maybe more accurately, how they build a solution step by step,
Yeah, the process.
we need something else. We need evaluation environments where we can control things much more precisely.
Exactly. We need to be able to crank up the difficulty, step by step, without worrying that the model just memorized the answer. And crucially, we need to see the intermediate steps, not just the final output.
Because the standard benchmarks are mostly just pass-fail on the final answer.
Pretty much. They tell you if it got it right, but not how or why it failed if it got it wrong. You don't get that diagnostic insight into the process itself.
Okay, so traditional methods judge the final dish, not how the chef cooked it.
That's a good way to put it. We need to see the recipe, the techniques used, where they might have burned the sauce, so to speak.
Yeah, we need that transparency into the internal process.
Which is exactly why this new study took a different path. A really novel, technically rigorous approach.
Mm-hmm.
They basically ditched the standard benchmarks and used what they call controllable puzzle environments.
Okay, controllable puzzle environments. Intriguing. So not a math test, but more like a series of brain teasers, logic puzzles.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine puzzles where you, the researcher, can precisely dial the difficulty up or down. Add more pieces, more rules, make the required solution path longer. And you know exactly how you're changing the underlying computational complexity.
And that gives you what advantages, technically speaking?
Several huge ones. First, you get fine-grained control over what's called compositional complexity, meaning you can systematically increase the number of logical steps or interdependent parts needed to solve it.
So not just bigger numbers, but more complex relationships between steps.
Exactly. Second, and this is critical, it pretty much eliminates the data contamination problem. These are often generic algorithms or specific setups that are super unlikely to be floating around in the massive training data sets.
So you're testing reasoning, not memory.
Right. Third, these puzzles demand algorithmic reasoning. You can't just pattern match your way out of them easily. You have to understand and apply rules step by step, keep track of the state.
Okay.
And finally, maybe the most powerful part for really digging deep. These puzzle setups allow for simulator-based evaluation.
Simulator-based meaning?
Meaning you can check every single step the model proposes against the rules of the puzzle using a simulator, not just the final answer. This lets you pinpoint the exact first move where the model goes wrong, the first mistake.
Wow. So you get this incredibly detailed trace of where the reasoning breaks down. Not just wrong, but wrong at step 7 because it violated rule B.
Precisely. That level of granularity is gold. It's what lets you really peek behind the curtain of these thinking models and diagnose exactly what's working and what isn't.
Okay. That really lays out the why behind using these puzzles. It makes a lot of sense.
That's fair.
So let's get into the specifics. What were these puzzles? The study used 4 different ones, right?
Yes, 4 distinct types, and they weren't chosen randomly. They were picked because they test different kinds of algorithmic thinking, planning, handling constraints. They have different ways complexity scales up.
Gives you a broader picture than just one type of problem.
Exactly, a more holistic diagnostic. So first up, a real classic, the Tower of Hanoi.
Ah, yes. 3 pegs, stack of disks. I remember this one from somewhere.
It's everywhere in computer science for a reason. It looks simple, but the complexity ramps up incredibly fast. So you have 3 pegs, let's say peg 0, 1, and 2, and n disks of different sizes, smallest to largest, all stacked on peg 0.
Goal is to move the whole stack to peg 2.
Correct, but with very strict rules.
The rules are the key, aren't they, for testing an AI?
Absolutely. Rule 1, only 1 disk moves at a time. Rule 2, only the top disk on a peg can move. Rule 3, the big one, never place a larger disk on top of a smaller disk.
Okay. And how do you make it harder? Just add more disks.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The complexity control is simply n, the number of disks. But because of the rules and the recursive nature of the optimal solution, the difficulty explodes. The minimum number of moves needed is 2 to the power of n minus 1.
2 to the n minus 1. So exponential scaling, add 1 disk.
And you basically double the minimum number of steps required. It's huge.
So N3 is 7 moves, N4 is 15, N10 is over 1,000.
1,023 moves, yep. It forces the model into deep planning, breaking the problem down, managing states over a potentially very long sequence. A great test for long-range consistency.
Okay, intense. What's the second puzzle? Checker jumping. Sounds different.
Very different. Imagine a 1D board, a line of squares. You've got n red checkers on the left and blue checkers on the right and 1 empty space in the middle, like RRRBBB.
And the goal is to swap them. BBBRRR.
Exactly. Mirror image. The rules. A checker can slide into an adjacent empty space, or it can jump over 1 checker of the opposite color into an empty space.
Okay. Any other constraints?
Crucially, no backward moves. Reds only move right, blues only move left.
How does complexity scale here, and what's it testing?
Complexity is controlled by n, the number of pairs, so 2 n checkers total. The minimum moves needed scales quadratically, n plus 1 squared minus 1.
Quadratic, not exponential, so less explosive growth than Hanoi, but still grows fast.
Right, and it tests a different kind of reasoning. More about sequential planning, sticking tightly to movement rules, looking ahead a few steps to avoid getting stuck. Less about deep recursion, more about careful, forward progressing sequences.
Got it. Next up, river crossing. This sounds like those old brain teasers.
It is. It's a generalized version of things like the missionaries and cannibals problem. You have n actors and their n corresponding agents. Think of them as pairs, like a person and their guard. They all need to get from the left bank to the right bank using a boat.
Okay. Boat capacity matters, I assume.
It does. And it varies. For n3 or less, the boat holds 2 K2. For n greater than 3, it holds 3 K3.
Variable capacity adds a wrinkle. What are the key rules?
Rules make it tricky. Boat capacity K can't be exceeded. The boat can't travel empty. And the really crucial one, the safety constraint. An actor cannot be with another agent unless their own agent is also present.
Ooh, okay. And that applies everywhere. Banks and the boat.
Banks in the boat during crossing. Complexity is controlled by n, the number of pairs. This puzzle really pushes models on managing multiple constraints simultaneously, tracking states across locations, left bank, right bank, boat, and making sure the safety rule is never violated. It's about precise state management and constraint satisfaction.
That sounds tough. Lots to keep track of. And the last one, blocks world.
Another foundational AI planning puzzle, super important historically. It's about rearranging stacks of blocks. You have an initial configuration of blocks on a table, maybe in several stacks, and a target goal configuration you need to reach.
Simple rules, right? Move one block at a time.
Pretty much. Only the topmost block on a stack can move. You can place it on an empty spot on the table, start a new stack, or on top of another block.
And how did they use it in the study? What was the complexity driver?
They focused on specific setups, like start with n blocks split across 2 stacks, and the goal is to interleave them into a specific pattern on a single stack. For example, start with A, B on one stack, and C, D on another. Goal is maybe D, B, C, A on one stack.
So it's about planning the sequence. Unstack this, move that, restack here.
Exactly. Hierarchical planning. Complexity is mainly driven by n, the number of blocks. Interestingly, while the number of possible states in blocks world grows factorially, which is huge, the minimum number of moves for these kinds of rearrangement tasks often grows more linearly with n.
Okay, so 4 puzzles. Exponential, quadratic, complex constraints, and planning arrangement. A diverse set.
Absolutely. And this variety, with their different complexities and rules, lets researchers really probe the models. They can see where the reasoning struggles start. Is it long sequences, complex interactions, specific types of rules? It gives a much richer picture than just one kind of test.
All right, we get the why and the what of the puzzles. Now let's peek behind the curtain at the how. How do they actually run these tests? Which specific models were involved?
Good question. They focused on what you might call the frontier LRMs, the really advanced ones available at the time, and crucially, they compared them to their non-thinking counterparts.
So comparing the thinking version versus the standard version of the same underlying model.
Exactly. They looked closely at Claude 3.7 Sonnet, both the version with the explicit thinking output and the version without it. Same comparison for DeepSeek. DeepSeek R1, the thinking one, versus DeepSeek V3, the non-thinking base model.
Okay, direct comparison. Any others?
They also included OpenAI's O3 Mini in some analyses, particularly for just looking at final accuracy, where you don't necessarily need to see the internal thought process.
So why these specific models like Claude and DeepSeek? What was special about them for this kind of study?
This is really key to the whole methodology. These models, unlike some others, actually gave the researchers access to the thinking tokens, the intermediate reasoning steps, the model's internal monologue, essentially.
They could actually see the chain of thought being generated.
Yes, and that access is absolutely critical. Without it, you can only judge the final answer. You can't do the deep dive into how the model got there, where it went wrong, how efficient its process was. It's the difference between getting just the final score on a test versus seeing all the students' calculations and scratch work.
Got it. So that access was non-negotiable for this level of analysis. What about the practical setup? Token limits. How many tries did they give the models?
They were pretty generous. For Claude and DeepSeek, they set a maximum token budget of 64,000 tokens per attempt. That's a lot of tokens. Plenty of room for thinking.
Oh, yeah. Definitely enough that the models wouldn't likely run out of space to express their reasoning, even for complex problems. They also set the temperature parameter to 1.0 for all the API calls.
Temperature, that controls randomness, right? 1.0 isn't fully deterministic.
Correct. Setting it to 1.0 allows for more exploration and variability in the responses rather than just sticking to the single most probable path. It helps see a wider range of the model's potential reasoning strategies. And for each specific puzzle setup, at each difficulty level, each n value, they generated 25 independent samples.
25 times. Why so many?
Statistical robustness. Language models can be variable, especially with temperature 0. Doing it 25 times helps ensure the results aren't just a lucky guess or an unlucky failure on one particular run. It gives a much better sense of the model's typical performance and the range of its abilities. Okay, makes sense. Now, the models generate these potentially long outputs with thoughts and maybe a solution buried inside. How did the researchers actually pull out the answer and check if it was right? That sounds like a technical challenge itself.
It absolutely is, and they built a pretty sophisticated pipeline to handle it. First, They use regex regular expressions to carefully search through both the final output and the thinking trace to find anything that looked like a proposed solution, like patterns matching moves or similar structured formats.
So automatically extracting the proposed move sequence.
Right. Then, those extracted solutions went through cleaning and normalization, stripping out extra text, comments, standardizing the format of the moves so they could be consistently compared and fed into the next stage.
Which was?
Validation. First, checking if the extracted solution format was even valid. Then, the crucial part, using the same tokenizer the models use internally, specifically KL100K-based for these models.
Why use the same tokenizer?
Because it allows for extremely accurate counting of tokens and figuring out the exact position of thoughts or solutions within that long thinking trace. Remember, tokens aren't always words. It's how the model breaks down text. Using the same breakdown lets you precisely locate things within the model's own view of its output.
Ah, color. For really accurate mapping of the thought process.
Exactly. They also filtered out duplicate solutions if a model proposed the same sequence multiple times within one trace, just keeping the first instance.
Okay. And the final check. Was it right?
This is where the custom puzzle simulators came in. Instead of just checking if the final state proposed by the model matched the goal state.
Which is what most benchmarks do.
Right. These simulators checked every single move in the proposed sequence. They'd run through the model solution step by step, and if any move violated the puzzle's rules, bam, the simulator would flag it as invalid and record that as the first failure move.
Wow. That's incredibly detailed feedback. You know exactly where the logic failed.
Precisely. It gives you that deep diagnostic power. Not just pass-fail, but a full autopsy of the reasoning attempt. It's what allows for the really fine-grained analysis of why these models succeed or fail.
Okay, so with this super detailed setup, the controlled puzzles, the thinking trace access, the step-by-step validation, what did they actually find? The study talks about these three distinct regimes of performance based on how complex the puzzle was.
Yeah, it's like the models behave differently depending on the difficulty. Let's start with the first regime. Low-complexity tasks. The really simple stuff.
Okay, what happened there? You'd think the thinking models would ace these.
Surprisingly, no. Or at least not necessarily better. The observation was that the standard LLMs, the non-thinking versions, often performed just as well as, or sometimes even better than, the thinking LRMs on these simple problems.
Better? How?
And, importantly, they were more token efficient. They used less compute to get the answer.
That seems totally backwards. Why would less thinking be better, even on easy problems? I thought the whole point was that thinking helps.
It is counterintuitive, isn't it? But think about it. If the problem is really simple, like 2 plus 2, generating a whole long explanation, first I identify the numbers, then the operation is just overhead. It takes more tokens, more compute time.
Ah, so the thinking process itself adds baggage when it's not needed.
Exactly. It can make the LRM less efficient and maybe even introduces slight chances for error in that longer generation process. For trivially simple things, just spitting out the answer directly, like the non-thinking models do, can be faster, cheaper, and just as accurate, sometimes even more so. It's like overthinking something basic.
Okay, that makes sense. The thinking mechanism has a cost. So what about when things get a bit trickier, the medium complexity tasks?
Now, this is where the thinking models really start to shine. This is where it gets interesting.
This is their sweet spot.
Pretty much.
Huh.
In this regime, problems that need maybe 10, 20, 30 steps, requiring some actual planning but not insanely complex, the LRMs show a clear, significant advantage over the non-thinking models. The performance gap really opens up.
So the thinking, the chain of thought, the self-reflection, whatever mechanisms they're using, it actually works here. It provides a real benefit.
Absolutely. For problems complex enough that the answer isn't immediately obvious or recallable from training data, but not so complex that the model gets totally lost, that ability to generate intermediate steps, explore possibilities, maybe self-correct along the way, it genuinely helps them find the solution much more reliably.
This is where the promise of LRMs seems to be realized.
Yes, this regime validates the core idea behind them. The thinking pays off for moderately complex compositional problems.
Okay. But then there's the third regime,
Hmm.
high complexity tasks. What happens when you really crank up the difficulty, like that N10 Tower of Hanoi?
Yeah, this is where the picture gets, well, pretty sobering. For problems beyond a certain complexity threshold, and that threshold varies a bit by model and puzzle type, basically everything falls apart.
Everything, both thinking and non-thinking models.
Both. They experience a complete performance collapse. Accuracy just plummets, often straight down to zero.
Wow, so the thinking helps push that boundary out a bit further.
It does, yes. LRMs tend to fail at a slightly higher complexity level than their non-thinking counterparts. They delay the collapse.
But they still collapse. They hit the same fundamental wall eventually.
Exactly. They don't fundamentally break through the scaling barrier. They just nudge it slightly, which raises a really big technical question.
If just adding more thinking isn't enough to crack these really hard problems, what's the actual bottleneck? What technical barrier are they hitting?
Right. It suggests it's not just about compute or generating longer thoughts. There might be something fundamental in the current architectures or how they're trained that limits their ability to generalize reasoning to truly complex, novel situations. It points towards a deeper scaling limitation that needs more investigation.
That performance collapse at high complexity is really stark when you look at the graphs in the study. Figure 6, top row, for example, it's
Yeah.
just accuracy tanks, drops to zero.
Yep, it's a very clear pattern across all the models they tested on all the puzzles. Beyond a certain point, they just can't solve them anymore. They hit a wall.
So they hit this wall, but the truly weird part, the thing that really makes you scratch your head, is what the study calls the thinking token paradox.
Ah, yes. This is probably the most surprising finding in the whole paper. It's completely counterintuitive. If you look at figures like Figure 1 middle or Figure 6 bottom row, or the detailed breakdown in Figure 13, you see something very strange happening with how much they think.
My gut feeling, my assumption would be problem gets harder, model is struggling, so it should try to think more, right? Generate a longer chain of thought, explore more options, use more of that token budget.
That's the logical expectation for any system trying hard to reason its way through difficulty, and it does happen initially. As complexity goes from low to medium, the LRMs do increase the number of thinking tokens they generate. They put in more effort.
Okay, that makes sense,
Yeah.
but
But right as they approach that point, where their accuracy is about to collapse to zero, the point where the problem is hardest for them, they reduce their thinking effort. They generate fewer thinking tokens.
wait, what? They think less when the problem gets harder and they're about to fail?
Exactly. Even though they often have plenty of their 64,000 token budget left. It's not that they're running out of
That's
space.
bizarre. It's like they just give up before they even hit the token limit. It's not a resource constraint then.
Doesn't seem to be. The study is pretty clear on that. It looks like an internal behavior. The models are, in effect, deciding to truncate their reasoning process precisely when you'd expect them to ramp it up.
So what does that imply? What could be causing that?
It suggests some kind of deep-seated limitation in how they manage their internal search or planning at inference time. Maybe their search process becomes incredibly inefficient or unstable at high complexity, and the model learns, implicitly, that generating more tokens beyond that point is unlikely to help and might even make things worse. Or maybe it's a failure of the self-correction mechanism.
Like a kind of learned helplessness? This looks too hard, better stop thinking so much.
That's one way to frame it. Whatever the exact mechanism, it's a critical finding. It really challenges the simple idea that more compute equals better reasoning, or that just letting models think longer will solve fundamentally hard problems.
Yeah, it suggests the bottleneck isn't just the amount of thinking, but the quality or structure of that thinking process itself, which seems to break down. It's not just about token budget, it's about the internal reasoning algorithm hitting its limits.
Precisely. It points to a fundamental issue with managing combinatorial explosion or maintaining logical consistency over very long chains, something that current architectures might not be inherently good at, even with explicit thinking steps grafted on. It's a major technical hurdle if we want truly scalable, robust reasoning.
Okay, so models think less when things get really hard. That's weird. But what about the content of their thoughts? When they are thinking, especially in those low and medium complexity zones, what does that internal monologue actually look like? Does analyzing the trace itself tell us more?
Absolutely. This is where having access to those thinking tokens in the simulator becomes so valuable. You can actually quantify how they explore the solution space. Let's look at Figure 1's bottom right panel and Figures 7a and 7b. They break it down nicely. First, consider the simple problems again.
Right, where the non-thinking models sometimes did better. What did the LRM's thoughts look like there? You mentioned overthinking.
That's exactly what the data shows. For easy problems, the LRMs often find the correct solution very, very early in their thinking trace, like almost immediately sometimes.
Okay, great. Problem solved.
But then they keep going. They continue generating thoughts, exploring other paths, often incorrect ones, or maybe just re-explaining the solution they already found.
Seriously. So they solve it, but then just keep rambling.
Pretty much. If you look at the distribution plots, the correct solutions cluster right at the beginning of the trace, while incorrect attempts or redundant thoughts pile up towards the end.
That sounds incredibly inefficient.
Yeah.
Just wasted computation, right?
Totally. It points to maybe a lack of a good stopping mechanism. They don't seem to reliably know, okay, I found a valid solution, I can stop thinking now. It highlights an inefficiency even when they can solve the problem.
Okay, so inefficient at the low end. What about moderate complexity? This was the sweet spot where LRMs outperformed. What were their thought processes like then? More focused.
More like a struggle, but a productive struggle. Here, the pattern reverses. Models typically explore incorrect solutions first. You see them trying things that don't work.
So they go down some wrong paths initially.
Yes, quite a few sometimes. It's only later in the thinking trace that the correct solution emerges. The distribution shifts. Incorrect attempts are more spread out, or earlier, correct solutions appear later.
So that suggests the self-correction or refinement process is actually working. They try things, hit dead ends, backtrack, try something else, and eventually find the right path.
Exactly. It looks much more like an active search and refinement process. It shows the thinking mechanisms are doing something useful, allowing iteration and correction. Yeah. But it also shows their initial guesses or paths aren't always great. They need that exploration time.
It sounds more like how a person might tackle a tricky problem, trial and error, learning from mistakes.
Yeah, it has that flavor. It's evidence the mechanisms are engaged, but maybe not optimally efficient from the get-go. They need to wander a bit before finding the way.
Okay. And then high complexity, where accuracy collapses and they think less. What do the traces show there in the little thinking they do? Any glimmers of hope?
Sadly, no. In that collapse regime, the analysis is brutally simple. The models just fail to generate any correct solutions within their thinking traces, period.
None at all, even buried deep in the trace.
None that the analysis could find. It's not like they find the answer and then make a mistake later. They never even seem to generate the correct sequence of moves at any point in their truncated thought process.
Wow, so the breakdown is total. The thinking process itself becomes unproductive. It's not just failing to get the final step right. It's failing to even find the path within its own reasoning.
Exactly. It really underscores that fundamental limit we talked about. They get lost in the complexity, and the thinking doesn't help them find their way out.
Okay, this next part of the study, for me, was maybe the most startling. It points to some really core limitations that go beyond just finding solutions. It's about how they follow instructions and how consistently they reason.
Yeah, these findings really get to the heart of what we mean by reasoning or intelligence in these models. Let's start with the experiment where they try giving the model the algorithm.
Right, this was for Tower of Hanoi. They didn't just ask the model to solve it, they actually gave it the step-by-step pseudocode for the standard recursive solution.
Exactly. The thinking was, okay, maybe the model struggles with finding the strategy. What if we just give it the strategy? Then the task becomes much simpler. And just execute these instructions precisely. It's like giving someone a detailed recipe versus asking them to invent a dish.
You'd expect performance to shoot up, right? Especially for a known, elegant algorithm like Hanoi's. It should just be a matter of following the steps.
That was the logical expectation. But the results were,
Yeah.
well, pretty shocking. Providing the explicit algorithm did not significantly improve performance.
Seriously, it didn't help much.
Nope. The models, even with the instructions right there in the prompt, still hit that accuracy collapse at roughly the same complexity level, around N8 or 9. Figures 8a and 8b show this quite clearly. It's almost like they couldn't properly use or follow the algorithm they were given.
That's huge. It means the problem isn't just figuring out what to do, it's also about reliably doing it, step by step, following logic consistently.
It strongly suggests that, yes, it points to a potential weakness in fundamental symbolic manipulation and consistent logical execution. They might be great at mimicking patterns of text that look like reasoning, but actually executing a precise, novel algorithmic procedure seems to be a major challenge for them, even when it's spelled out.
So it calls into question if they have a true understanding of the logic, or if it's more surface-level pattern matching of problem-solving narratives.
It raises exactly that question. If you hand it the blueprint and it still can't build the thing correctly beyond a certain size, what does that say about its grasp of the underlying principles versus just recognizing familiar shapes? It suggests a potential gap between their linguistic abilities and their core computational logical abilities. It's not just about search. It's about execution fidelity.
Okay, wow, that's one major finding. What about the inconsistent reasoning across different puzzle types?
This is another really telling observation. You'd think a generally capable reasoning model would perform somewhat consistently based on the inherent complexity of a problem, right?
Yeah.
Maybe measured by the minimum number of steps or the depth of logic required.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Harder problem, worse performance, but maybe predictably so.
But that's not quite what they saw. Take Claude 3.7 Sonnet thinking model again. On Tower of Hanoi with N10, that's 123 moves minimum, it often made its first mistake quite late, maybe around move 100 or even later.
So it could execute a long sequence correctly before failing.
Right. But on River Crossing with N3, which only needs 11 moves minimum, it failed much, much earlier, often after only 4 correct moves.
Wait, it could do 100+ steps correctly on a 1,000-step problem, but failed after 4 steps on an 11-step problem. That makes no sense if it's just about raw complexity or sequence length.
Exactly. It's inconsistent.
Yeah.
Similarly, models could solve Tower of Hanoi N5, 31 moves, almost perfectly, but struggled badly with River Crossing N3, 11 moves.
So what does that suggest if it's not just about the puzzle's inherent difficulty?
It strongly suggests performance is heavily tied to familiarity. How similar is this specific puzzle instance to things the model saw during its massive training?
Ah, back to the training data.
It seems likely. The hypothesis is that maybe Tower of Hanoi examples, even complex ones, are relatively common in computer science texts, coding websites, etc., that form the training data. But maybe river crossing problems, especially for n greater than 2, which is the classic missionaries and cannibals, are much rarer online.
So even though River Crossing N3 is technically simpler in terms of moves than Tower of Hanoi N5 or N10, the lack of specific training examples makes it harder for the model.
That appears to be the case. It suggests the models aren't applying a truly general reasoning skill that works equally well in any logical structure. Instead, their reasoning ability might be much more domain-specific or example-specific, heavily reliant on having seen similar patterns before.
That really challenges the idea of them having general intelligence, doesn't it? If performance depends so much on the specifics of the training data distribution rather than the abstract logical structure of the problem.
It certainly does. It highlights that even these advanced LRMs, with their explicit thinking steps, might still be operating largely based on sophisticated pattern matching and interpolation from their training data, rather than possessing a robust, transferable, algorithmic understanding. It's a critical point about the limits of generalization in current models.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really deep dive, and honestly, some of these findings are quite sobering when you think about the hype around AI reasoning. Let's try to pull the main technical threads together. What are the absolute key takeaways here?
Okay, let's recap. First, we saw clear evidence for 3 distinct performance regimes. LRMs can be inefficient on simple tasks, they excel at medium complexity, but then they hit a wall.
Right, that wall being the second key point. A fundamental accuracy collapse at high complexity. Thinking helps push the wall back a bit, but doesn't break it down.
Exactly. Third, the really weird one, that counterintuitive scaling limit where models reduce their thinking effort just when problems get hardest, despite having the capacity to think more. It's not a budget issue, it's a behavioral one.
And fourth, looking inside the thoughts showed inefficiencies like overthinking on simple tasks and a struggle to find the path even during the productive medium phase. And at high complexity, the thoughts were just empty of correct solutions.
And finally, perhaps the most profound limitations, the struggle with exact algorithmic execution, even when given the instructions, suggesting issues with clear logical application. And the inconsistent reasoning across different puzzle types, pointing towards heavy reliance on training data familiarity over generalizable skill.
Okay, put all that together. What does it mean for actually building and using these things? What are the big implications for AI development moving forward?
Well, it definitely raises some serious technical questions about what's actually going on when these models reason. Are they truly understanding and manipulating logic, or are they incredibly sophisticated mimics?
It sounds like the evidence leans more towards mimicry, or at least highlights significant gaps in true understanding.
It certainly suggests that current approaches, largely based on scaling up transformer architectures and adding chain-of-thought prompting or fine-tuning, might be hitting some fundamental barriers. Barriers related to true generalization, long-range logical consistency, and precise algorithmic execution.
So just making models bigger or letting them generate longer thought chains might not be the answer to achieving truly robust, human-like reasoning.
That seems to be a strong implication. It suggests we might need to look beyond just scaling, perhaps exploring different architectures, maybe hybrid systems that explicitly combine neural pattern recognition with more traditional symbolic reasoning engines, or new training methods that really force models to learn procedural consistency, not just surface statistics.
This definitely impacts how we should think about deploying them, especially in situations needing high reliability.
Absolutely. If their reasoning is brittle, inconsistent, and prone to collapse on unfamiliar or highly complex problems, that has huge implications for safety-critical applications, scientific discovery, or anywhere we need truly dependable logical deduction.
Now, every study has its limits. We should probably touch on the limitations of this specific research from a technical standpoint.
Good point. First, these puzzles, while great for control, are a narrow slice of reasoning. They don't capture everything, especially tasks involving vast world knowledge, common sense, creativity, or ambiguity. So the findings are most relevant to algorithmic procedural reasoning.
Okay, so it's focused on a specific important type of reasoning, but not all types.
Right. Second, the researchers relied on black box API access. They could see the input and the output, including thinking tokens, but not the internal activations or weights inside the model. So they could observe the behavior, but can't fully dissect the internal neural mechanisms causing it.
More detailed analysis would require white box access, which isn't usually available for these frontier models.
Exactly. And third, the deterministic puzzle simulators provide perfect step-by-step validation. That's powerful, but in many real-world problems, the rules are fuzzier, and validating intermediate steps might not be so clear-cut. So transferring these precise findings to messier domains needs care.
But for understanding the core algorithmic reasoning capabilities and limitations of current LRMs, this approach seems incredibly valuable.
Oh, absolutely. Despite the limitations, it provides crucial, empirically grounded insights into how these models actually work and where they fall short when pushed on controlled, complex logical tasks. It sets a benchmark and highlights key areas for future research. Hashtag outro.
So here's the thought to leave you with, chewing over the technical details we've discussed. If giving a model the perfect recipe, the exact algorithm doesn't stop it from failing on complex tasks. And if these models strangely decide to think less right when the going gets toughest, what's it really going to take?
Yeah, what technical breakthroughs do we need?
What advances in AI architecture or training methods are needed to get us beyond this incredibly sophisticated pattern matching towards large reasoning models that possess truly robust, consistent, and generalizable problem-solving intelligence? How do we build AI that can reliably follow logic, even on novel problems with extreme complexity?
It really highlights that the path towards AGI, or even just highly reliable AI reasoning, is still long and involves solving some fundamental technical challenges we haven't cracked yet.
Absolutely. This deep dive gave us, hopefully, a clear, technically grounded view of where we stand with LRM reasoning today. If you want to keep up with the latest in AI and ML research, definitely check out the resources linked in our bio.
Yeah, lots of great papers coming out all the time. Our webpage link there will have pointers.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.